Hello from ABA Tech Show 2019 in Chicago, Illinois. I'm Laurence Colletti.
Jason McNew.
Stanley Louissaint.
And we're on the road with Legal Talk Network. And we're back. We're closing out our coverage for the ABA Tech Show 2019 on the first day. And I've got everybody here. So I've got Stanley and Jason joining me. You guys just completed your presentation. Is that correct?
Correct.
So it was titled Firewalls for Today's Law Office. But before we get into that, let's learn a little bit more about you. Now, Stanley, you're a returning guest. Let's start with you. Where do you work? What do you do?
All right. I'm Stanley Louissaint, principal and founder of Fluid Designs. We're based in Union, New Jersey. We are a full-service IT consulting firm specializing in law firms, predominantly with some e-discovery, mobile forensics, and some of that other fun stuff.
Awesome. And Jason?
I'm the founder of Stronghold Cybersecurity, which is based out of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. We have clients all over the country that range from very large to very small, and what we do is strategic cyber risk management. Before I started the company, I worked for the White House Communications Agency for the last 12 years, working in buildings with no windows, surrounded by barbed wire and machine guns and that sort of high security stuff. So security is what I do.
So if you guys wouldn't mind, just give us the 50,000 foot on your presentation titled Firewalls for Today's Law Office.
What we were talking about is one of the big differences between having these consumer-grade devices versus business-grade devices, right? That is a predominant thing that people tend to go to, your Best Buys or your Staples and pick something up. And what's the difference between actually getting the right equipment versus getting the equipment that's not the bad equipment? So that's really the general thing. And once you get what you need, then you're able to kind of power through and start to build things around that.
It's just too easy to walk into a box store and then buy something for $99 and then plug it into the network and then think that you're protected. But reality's really a lot. It's just much different than that. And commercial firewalls, over the long run, the total cost of ownership for a decent commercial grade firewall can actually be lower than one of the cheap ones. They tend to have pretty long legs and good manufacturer support.
All right, so I want to back up a step. So most of the legal profession is either solo practitioner or work in a small firm. And so chances are, they've probably heard the term firewall, but they don't really know what it means and why it's important. So why don't you guys give us a little bit of a definition of what a firewall does and all the things that it protects you from?
Well, you got to look at the origins of the term. It was an old construction term, right? And a firewall was designed to spread to prevent the spread of fire from one part of a structure to another. And a network firewall is similar to that in the respect that it's supposed to prevent the spread of malicious logic from the internet to the internal network. So it's basically a barrier between your network and the internet writ large. At least that's the old definition of it. It's modern reality is a lot more complicated than that, but that's it in a nutshell.
So when you say malicious logic, you talk about a computer virus and...
Yes, correct. Computer virus, bad actors, right? People from the outside trying to get into your network and potentially get some of your data. So essentially, you can almost say it's your first line of defense.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the aspects of your presentation. So there's firewall options, and so obviously lawyers come to us in all different sizes and types of practice. Whether you're a small firm and solo to mid-size and large, in a variety of practice areas that may or may not be more attractive to hackers and people that want personal information. So let's just get into some firewall options that lawyers can be taking a look at.
So, especially when you're talking a small firm, right? You have the option of an on-site firewall where you actually have a physical device in your office, right? Providing that service for you. You also have the option of what we call a cloud-based firewall, where there is actually no physical appliance in your office, but it is hosted somewhere else. That tends to be for a little bit bigger firms, not necessarily the smaller ones, because there's a constant cost associated with it. And then in addition to that, you also have what we call, in terms of options, you have firewalls that have wireless built into them and then firewalls that don't have wireless built into them. So, usually we have a few, a few requirements or recommendations, I like to say, that we like people to follow to decide what works best for them in their situation. If you're like sub 30 users, with an office of let's say less than 1,500 square feet, you get an on-site firewall with wireless built in, and you won't, you should be able to mitigate your risk as best as possible there. But yeah, there's a lot of options, and sometimes you got to try to whittle it down.
So why is the wireless part so important?
I mean, look where we are now, right? Everyone has mobile devices. Everyone, in terms of, and I think mobile device is a great word and a loaded word, right? Because mobile device could be anything from your laptop to your iPad to your Surface Book, your Surface Pro, to your cell phone. And wireless connectivity is a huge part of our lives these days, right? I mean, we're down here in this convention hall with my cell phone doesn't work, right? But wireless works. So, and that's the case for a lot of different things. So having that wireless connectivity is important, just to make sure that people can get to the network resources as required. And then on the other side, having like a guest wireless is important for if your clients are coming in and let's say you guys are doing some work and they might be in your office for half a day, they bring their laptop and you guys need to kind of have data going back and forth. That's a way to keep them connected as well through that guest network.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting point because to be honest with you, I didn't realize that there was a different security risk based on the wireless part of it versus just being wired in. People would attack from the outside of the network, but it sounds
they're very
like
different.
Oh, they're very different.
There's ways to attack wireless. Certainly, if you have physical access to any kind of facility that's using wireless, and they're not managing. Usually, they're going to use pre-shared keys in the small business space, and if those pre-shared keys are not managed properly, it's definitely possible to attack that. And
just to clarify what a pre-shared key is, that's essentially a password, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Whatever it is. So if what happens when one user gets it, they tend to spread it like wildfire to everybody else. And a guest comes in, they go, oh, here's the key to use. And you got to make sure from a business policy perspective to make sure you let the users know that is not allowed.
Right. And it's also important to make sure that those passwords or pre-shared keys are long as possible. I prefer to use passphrases, making up silly phrases that are easy to remember. They're cryptographically difficult to crack and easy to remember.
So I want to get back to the part with the cloud-based versus the locally stored firewall. And so my experience with that is, the cloud-based email doesn't require updates because someone else is doing that for you. So you always have the latest technology in there. And so is that a similar recommendation? I mean, obviously, the firewall is only as good as the updates. And if it's locally stored, perhaps it's not getting the updates it needs. Whereas if it's a cloud-based firewall solution, it's always being updated and you don't have to worry about it from the consumer side. What do you guys say?
So you're 100% correct, right? You were essentially, with a cloud-based firewall, you were paying someone else to be responsible for it. And that also leads to something else, just so you know, that, kind of one and the same, but also what we call firewall as a service, right? Which once again goes back to another monthly subscription. And even if you have a firewall on premise, it is someone else's responsibility. So they are updating it, they are managing it, they are watching it for you, right? So yes, you and I have talked about this in the past, right? Mitigating risk, right? Shifting it from you to somebody else and making it their job. So yes, if you go and just buy a firewall from, even if it's not from a big box, right? You just, you go and you buy a business grade firewall and you're not doing that work to maintain it. Jason here likes to say you got to water it like a lawn. Otherwise, guess what? It's not going to do what you want it to do and it's not going to protect you. It's a constant. It's not just a one-off thing.
Yeah, Stan's right about that. As far as any kind of security technology goes, there's no such thing as set it and forget it. Good security requires constant vigilance, and that's just the reality of the world that we live in.
So second to last question for you guys. I'd like to leave our listeners with practical, plug-in immediately, instant takeaways that provide value to them in their practice lives. And so, obviously the population of attorneys is mostly small firm, mostly solo, and so they're probably out there with their MacBook Pros doing their legal work. They may be working, on their own locally stored, document creation programs and whatnot. But Stanley and Jason, if they were to talk to you, what kind of tips would you have for them? Keep it simple, obviously, but what kind of tips would you have for them, like services to look at and to increase their security, make sure that confidential client information isn't getting into the wrong hands?
For the small business space, I got to be honest with you. I think if you're a solo practitioner, you just have a couple of people, that firewall is a critical piece of your infrastructure. And there's a lot of good managed service providers out there, and so a lot of them are regional guys like Stanley. And I really think in a case like that, when you're dealing with something, A, you can't operate without. If it's down, you're down. And then B, it's providing a lot of security features. It's really best to call somebody up and then have them manage that firewall for you. For a small company, definitely.
Yeah, and Jason is right about that. And it's really not going to be a huge and crazy expense. And I will say something else. One of those requirements that I would tell you to have that managed service provider do for you is to actually set up a VPN. So what happens is when you're on the road and you're doing things from afar, you can VPN back into your office and kind of tunnel your traffic through, so you're not using, right? Even in this conference where we are, right, there's a public Wi-Fi, but you want to make sure that all your data that's going in and out is fully protected from bad actors, because guess what? They're not only trying to get you at your office, but also wherever you might be.
So building on that, just as a follow-up, obviously a lot of people, it's a, BYOD, bring your own device to work. And so people have iPhones, they have Android, and they bring that to work. And it's like one device to kind of manage all of their contacts, manage all of their communications. So do you have any recommendations regarding that? If you got these add-ons, you got employees that are
It's a
using
poor practice. I never recommend to my clients that they use BYOD, and it's for a variety of legal and technical reasons. There's just too much risk associated with it.
So would you recommend they buy cell phones for their employees?
Well, yeah, because the thing is, if you have an issue, a security issue, you cannot physically take somebody's portable device from them. So there's issues with the data on it may belong to you, but the device doesn't. And we really need to have a situation where both the device and the data belong to the employer. In the case of, insider threat or exfiltration or something like that, human resources or IT, they need the ability to go up and then take the device from that person. And if they own it, you can't do that. So it's just too much risk in my mind. As a security practitioner, I recommend against BYOD.
Anything to add to that, Stanley?
Yeah, so actually that hit on my first session I did today, which was mobile device management, right? And with that, we were actually having a conversation with a tech person who actually works at a company that has 400,000 employees, in case you're wondering. And she was mentioning how in litigation, employees do not want to give IT their cell phones, their personal cell phones. And, back to what Jason was saying, recommending against that. I think you need to look at your particular business and your business risks and try to assess. If you're a multinational company like the company that we were talking about earlier, that you're in constant litigation at every turn, whether you want to be or not. So you might just say, this is not for me. I'm not going to say that's necessarily practical for some of the smaller firms, but there are management techniques that are available to make sure that you can try to secure the company data, through like mobile application management as best as possible. So that is an option that does exist, but it's not full mobile device management where you have complete control over the device, just the company information.
Well, before we close it out, if our listeners, they want to follow up with you guys, they want to ask some additional questions, learn a little bit more, how can they find you? Why don't we start with Jason?
I can be found through our website, which is www.strongholdcybersecurity.com.
And Stanley.
All right, easy to get me, right? I say easiest man in America. You can give me a call, 908-688-2444, or you can shoot me an email, long one, just should be ready, SLOUISSAINT at FLUIDDESIGNS.com.
Excellent. Well, we've reached the end of the road for today's episode, but I want to thank our guests for joining us today. Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you, Stanley. And I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcasting app. We'll see you next time for another episode of On the Road with Legal Talk Network.
If you'd like more information about what you've heard today, please visit LegalTalkNetwork.com. Subscribe via iTunes and RSS. Find us on Twitter and Facebook, or download our free Legal Talk Network app in Google Play and iTunes. The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by, Legal Talk Network, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer.